We have decided to dedicate the month of May to moms. We will have some special moms coming on in the next few episodes to chat all things motherhood and their personal stories and experiences. No matter what stage of life you are in now, I know that we all have something that we can glean from them. Happy Mother's Day to all of you from Unashamedly You. Hello, and welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast, a space to enlighten, encourage, and empower you to go out and unashamedly be who God is calling you to be. I am your host, Jamie Herndon. I pray you hear less of me and more of Him as you listen to today's episode. Let's grow together. We have a guest with us today that I have followed on social for a while. She had an incredible wedding, shares clothing, inspo, home decor, gardening, just all the things. But she also shares real life struggles and heartbreak. So, several of you I know have mentioned wanting to hear from her, and I'm just excited to be bringing her on the Unashamedly You podcast. Asiah Featherstone, what an honor to have you with us today. And take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, Jamie, it is such an honor to be here. I have listened to Unashamedly You for so long, and so it's just an honor to be here. My name is Asiah Featherstone. I live in Houston, Texas. I attend Brother Jackson's church here in Houston as well. I was actually born, raised, and married in this church, so that has been awesome. I am newly-ish married. My husband and I made 2 years last year. And we have two of the cutest Frenchies. One is named Luca, one is named Lucy. I'm a photographer and I love to cook and I love to garden.
And you have like all the cute things. So like whenever you were setting up, your coffee and you're like doing the honey thing, I'm like, where did you get this?
Hmm.
Where did you get that?
Yes,
It's
yes. I
always
love all that
so
stuff.
cute and fun. So if you don't
Thank
follow her, guys, you need to because she brings lots of inspiration. So we're saying, you share a lot on social media, which I love. But one thing that I really love about your account is honestly, you've been so raw and real through the hard things and letting other people know that are going through these things that they're not alone. And I know that you have had a difficult season that you have had to walk through. So could you share maybe a little bit about that testimony and background of where your sharing's coming from?
Yes, absolutely. So, as I said before, I'm newly-ish married. So, a few months after I got married, I got diagnosed with what is called PCOS. I started to have some symptoms and I wasn't too sure. So, I went to the doctor, got several different opinions. And the doctor that diagnosed me with PCOS, she let me know that with this diagnosis, I would need medication to be able to get pregnant naturally. And I didn't really like that. My husband and I weren't trying at that time, but nobody ever wants to hear that you're going to need medication to get pregnant or it's going to be hard. At that point in time, I went home. I started to do a lot of research on what PCOS was, what supplements could I take, what was the root cause of it. And so I started to take supplements, and I actually started to feel a lot better after I started taking supplements. But, anyways, I had heard a lot of people talking about a 52-day fast and God was doing these miracles for people. And I was like, oh my word, like I need to do this fast. Well, I had a family friend actually tell me about what God had did for her. And it was absolutely incredible. And so she actually gifted me a 52-day fast book. And in one Sunday, I read the whole entire book. I was so inspired. And so I decided that day, that the next day, I would be starting the 52-day fast. And so I wrote my list. I wrote all these things that I wanted God to do and answer. And on that list, of course, I had a baby. And so I started my fast, and God answered some of those things, some of the things He didn't answer. But at the end of the 52 days, I was not pregnant. And I still was hoping though. I was like, God, I know that you can do this. I've heard the testimony of others. And a few short weeks after the 52-day fast, I was pregnant without any medication. And that is a miracle. It was absolutely just a God thing. And so I give him all the glory for that.
That is absolutely incredible. So many amazing things have happened with the 52-day fast. And actually, it was preached by my bishop, Bishop Holmes. If you guys have not heard the 52-day fast podcast that we did, it was actually the very last podcast of 2023. So go back and listen to that podcast if you've not listened to it. Also, we do offer to send you the book. He offered to send the book to all of our listeners for free. Some of you guys are still emailing to get that, and we are still putting those out in the mail. So you got pregnant, and which was a huge miracle, but then some things transpired through along the way.
Yes, absolutely. So I had a pretty easy pregnancy because I had the fear of not being able to get pregnant. Whenever I got pregnant, I was so scared of anything happening. And so I would have to say during the pregnancy, I was anxious, but I also was extremely joyful. Like God had just given us this miracle. Throughout the pregnancy, our baby was growing exactly the way she should be growing. Everything was great, but there were several times where I would feel different symptoms. And as someone who had never been pregnant before, my doctor would say, okay, you may need to go to the hospital, just get checked out. And so I'm going to try to make this very long story as short as I possibly can. But around 17 weeks of pregnancy, I went into the hospital, and it turns out that I was already dilated. And that's never good to be dilated that early. And so they went ahead and decided to admit me into the hospital. And when they admitted me into the hospital, since I was dilated, that either means the baby can come early or you can contract an infection. It's a lot of different things. And so they did not want me to get an infection. And so they told me that if I didn't have any contractions for 24 hours and if I did not have a fever for 24 hours, then they could put in what's called an emergency cerclage, which would basically be a stitch that would go around my cervix to try to keep the baby in. That was the only thing they could do. So I was admitted into the hospital. I wasn't feeling well. But I was praying. I still had hope at this point. I was like, God, I know you can do this. I know you can bring me, my baby through. You gave me this baby. You've given me a testimony. I know you can do this. Nothing is too hard for you. And so we were praying. We sent out texts for our friends, church family to be praying. And in that 24 hours, I did not spike a fever. God answered our prayer, and I was actually able to get the emergency cerclage. And so after I got the emergency cerclage, everything was going good. We were really, really happy. And I was actually released to go home. And so I went home. I was being very, very careful. And the next day when I woke up, I was walking around the house and it felt like my water broke, which they did let me know there is a chance with this that it may not work. Your water could break, but so far, so good. So the next day, my water broke and I was devastated. My husband was at work. So my parents came over and took me straight to the hospital. My husband met us there. And it was at this point that they were like, we just have to watch you. They did tons of ultrasounds. And while they were doing the ultrasounds, I had heard of women in the past where their water would break and they would just have to stay in the hospital for the remainder of their pregnancy. And so I was like, all right, God, if this is what I have to do, I'm okay with doing that. I just want my miracle baby that you've given us. And so I was praying while they were doing all of these different tests. And so they finally pretty much let me know that they were going to admit me into labor and delivery. And while I was in labor and delivery, I had a temperature spike. And when your temperature spikes, that's never a good thing. That means that there's probably some type of infection. And so a doctor came in and she let me know that, hey, you're going to have to deliver the baby. You have an infection. We're going to have to remove the emergency cerclage that we had just put in. And I was devastated. And I was like, please, 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 is there anything that I can do to save my baby? I don't want to deliver her. And I had heard people say in the past too, sometimes you have to advocate for yourself in these situations. And so I was doing everything that I possibly could for them not to take my baby out. And so the doctor came in a little bit later and she said, if we don't take this cerclage out, and if you don't deliver this baby, you will not make it. You actually have what's called sepsis. And at the time, I did not know what sepsis was. And honestly, I did not feel good either. I felt awful. And so when she said that if the baby didn't come out, I wouldn't make it, I talked with my husband. My mom was right there as well. And he was like, Asia, You're going to have to deliver her. And so at that point, I knew that, all right, this is happening. And so the doctor came in and actually gave me medication to induce labor. And she let me know the first dose of medication that we're going to give you is going to be the strongest. And we're going to hope that the baby will come out within 24 hours. So, a few short hours, I started to have seizure-like symptoms. Like my body was convulsing. I was uncontrollable. My blood pressure went up over 200. My oxygen had dropped, and all of these doctors and anesthesiologists had came into the room and they were trying to figure out what was going on, how could they help me. And in this moment when all of this was going on, I couldn't say anything, but in my head I was praying, God, please, please don't take me. I truly felt like I was dying. My heart rate was over 200 as well. And that's just never a good feeling. And we didn't know what was going on. My husband was holding my hand. You could see the fear in his eyes. Everybody was trying to get me to talk, see what was going on. And so it was just this moment of where I feel like it could have went really south, but God kept me through. And so they finally got me to where I was stable, everything was good, and the doctors left out of the room. We were still waiting on the baby to come, and I started to feel something on my legs. And when you're in the hospital and things are going on, you just never know what's going on. And so my mother walked over to me and I'm like, Mom, can you check under these blankets and just see like what's going on? So when my mom lifted the blanket back, she said, the baby's here. And my husband jumped up and we were like, oh my word, the baby's here. And so they ran out to get the nurses and the doctors. The doctors came in and lo and behold, we had delivered our precious baby girl, Nova, and she was born sleeping. And so it's so crazy because I can say truly that this was one of the best moments of my life to see the baby that God had given us. The doctors cleaned her up, and my husband immediately put her in my arms. Even though she was born sleeping, it was nothing like holding your own baby when you deliver them, even though it was not the ideal situation. And so we're holding the baby and the doctor comes in, and after you give birth you have to deliver the placenta as well, and they have to make sure everything else comes out okay. And so they had some complications with that, and so they were like, we're going to have to take you into surgery and you're going to have to get what's called a DNC. And so they realized that I was losing a lot of blood. And so I had only about 5 minutes with our baby, and my husband had to take her and they had to wheel me into surgery. And I want to note during all of this too, even though I was feeling joy from holding our baby, I also felt very sick. I was very, very, very weak and just almost a feeling that I just cannot describe. And so gave the baby to my husband. They wheeled me back into surgery. And in surgery, they took care of everything. Once they brought me back, the nurses were so kind and had put my baby in this beautiful little white dress, and they had already taken her footprints and all of those things. And it was amazing, actually. My mother-in-law, who lives 3 hours away, in that short amount of time, when she found out that I was going to have to deliver the baby, she drove all the way down to Houston, and my best friends had made it to the hospital. And so it was just a God thing that all of my people were able to meet our baby. And so I had a few hours being able to visit with my family and the baby. And it was really sad because at this point I was still so weak that I could hardly hold her. I would hold her for a little bit and then I would have to give it to somebody else because I just couldn't hold her. I would start shaking. I had these uncontrollable shakes and I still just did not feel good. At this time, they had me hooked up to several IVs on antibiotics. They were trying to get the sepsis to go away, but I still was not stable. And so at this point, they were like, we're going to have to send you to ICU. And I had never been to ICU. And so I didn't really understand a lot of hospital terms. And I really feel like that was God keeping my nerves down. Because had I known what sepsis really was, had I known what the ICU really was, I think I would have been panicking. And so at this time, they told my family, only her husband can go into ICU with her and the baby can go as well. And that meant a lot to us that they would allow our baby to travel into ICU with us. So I got into ICU and they started running a lot of tests. And I did kind of notice, okay, this is a little bit more serious. The care seems a little bit more intense. And they started hooking me up to a lot more IVs. So at one point in time, I had 7 IVs in me. They even had an IV in my foot because they were trying to pump so much medication into me. And they had to give me 4 different blood transfusions to keep the blood in my body. And they gave me something that was called platelets. Still not really exactly sure what that is, but they needed to give it to me. So at this point, I wasn't stable. They were trying their hardest to help me to become stable. And I had been in the ICU at the women's hospital where I delivered for about 2 days. And they were like, your heart is not doing what it needs to do. The sepsis is still here. And for anybody that doesn't know what sepsis is actually where infection gets in your bloodstream. And if it starts to get to your organs will start shutting down and you die. It's a life-threatening condition that is not good at all. And so that's why they were handling it so seriously. And so what they didn't want is they didn't want my heart to start shutting down or any of my other organs. And even with all the antibiotic and the care and the medicine that they were giving me, I was not getting better. And so they let me know that we're going to transfer you to a heart ICU at a different hospital. But this meant that I was not going to get to be with my baby anymore. And so they were going to have to take my baby and take her, wherever they take the babies. And so we were very, very, very upset. We spent our last moments with her, took some pictures, and I wanted to always remember how she was at that point in time. I didn't know if I would ever see her again. And so my mom was so kind and took our baby where she needed to go. And they put me and my husband on an ambulance and they transferred us into a heart ICU. And it was crazy because I was crying a lot on and off, but also I was in so much pain. You just can't even almost process what's going on. And so we ended up getting to the heart ICU. And my parents were able to be there for a little bit, but we got there so late at night that they couldn't stay as long as they wanted to. So shortly after my parents left, my heart went into what's called AFib. And AFib is basically just like where your heart isn't on beat. So my heart rate would go from 200 back to 170 to 180, then back down. And this was another moment where I felt like I was going to die. I was just like, God, please, 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 please save me. I don't want to die. I don't want to leave my husband and my family. And I was scared to death. My husband was scared. And at this point, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. And my husband was like, do you want me to call pastor? And we try not to bother pastor if we don't have to, but I was like, yes, please call pastor. And so he called our pastor. He explained what was going on. And he put my pastor on the phone. And while I was in AFib, my pastor prayed over us. And just sometimes just hearing that prayer, it brought a little bit of comfort to me. And about 30 minutes after that, they finally got me stable. And so after I was stable, I spent about another 5 to 6 days in that heart ICU with the doctors and nurses just trying to get the sepsis out of my body, trying to get me stable. And finally, I was able to go home. And so it was after I was home that I got to process kind of everything that happened. And it was really crazy how this exactly happened because at this point, I still was not understanding like, what just happened? I lost my baby. I almost lost my life. And I happened to be scrolling on Facebook and I noticed there was a teacher that taught me in high school and she was missing her legs. She didn't have arms. And I was like, oh no, like what happened to her? So I went on her profile and I was scrolling and I noticed I found her GoFundMe page and it had said that her body went into sepsis and her body had sepsis shock. And I was like, that's exactly what I had. And it was at that moment I realized exactly what God had saved me from. I left the hospital. I had both of my legs, I had both of my arms. I was in my right mind. I could talk, I could breathe right. And I was like, oh my word, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. I know that you took my baby, but you saved me. I couldn't see it then. I didn't understand why I was going through everything. But I realized how severe the sepsis was. And even actually, on the papers that the doctors gave to us when we were leaving, my diagnosis said severe sepsis without shock. So while all of that was going on, I had a severe case of this sepsis. God kept my body from shutting down, from going into shock. And that is just a complete miracle.
One thing throughout your story, and which brings help and healing, I'm sure, to so many, but that you have given God the glory like in every single part of the story. It seems like it would be so easy to be bitter, to be upset. And I'm sure that you have thoughts on those things as well. But you have not failed to give God glory that He still performed a miracle. Even giving Him the glory that you did the 52-day fast, He still allowed you to have a baby without having medication. It's still a miracle.
Absolutely. Yes, it is.
And miracles, they don't always happen or end up how we expected or how we wanted.
Yes.
But
Yes.
whenever He performs a miracle and He does what we ask, still giving Him the glory, like, God, you still did this for me. You still allowed this to happen for me. And I'm still giving you the glory that you deserve.
Absolutely. Yes. He does. He's so good. And I do believe, even in heartbreak and in tragedy, that he deserves all the glory because in this particular situation, he didn't have to let me live. That was a situation where I could have easily been gone, but he allowed me to be here. And so I just am so thankful. But like you said, it is easy to get bitter. And I think a lot of times when things are going really well in life, we have a lot of faith. Things are going good, we feel good, but it's in times like these that our faith is tested. And I can honestly say that my faith was tested because while I knew God had saved my life, when I was able to come to and really process, I was so hurt. I was so disappointed. I was so let down. I was like, God, you gave me my miracle. You answered my prayer. I even kind of got a little bit out of my comfort zone. I wrote my testimony on Facebook. I was excited. And I was like, God, you let me down. And I was born, raised in church. And so I felt a little guilty for even thinking like that. Because beforehand, I had always thought, being born and raised in church, I personally felt, I was like, how can people get mad at God? How can people question God? Like I just didn't understand. I hadn't been through a life situation where something like that would happen. And so at this point in time, I realized, okay, I see. And so I did feel those emotions and I felt guilty for feeling that way, but also, I'm human. And as humans, we have these emotions of disappointment and doubt. But I guess I felt bad that I was having that with God. But one thing is, God understands our emotions. He gave us these emotions. And even when he was on the cross, he felt these emotions. He said, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? He felt the emotions that we all feel as well. And in all of my years of living, I had never experienced, so much pain and so much grief. And so I just couldn't wrap my head around it. But one thing that I did was I brought all of these emotions to God. So there would be a lot of times, actually, every day I would wake up and have those feelings of, this is my reality. Why did this happen? And I would have to talk to God. Why did you let this happen, God? Why? This could have turned out so much differently. But I really feel like talking to God through this and talking to Him about this is what has brought so much healing. And so I want anyone to know that if you are feeling upset or disappointed, not even just if you've had a loss, if anything has happened in your life where you don't understand, where you know that God could have pulled through. I know God could have saved my daughter. And he allowed us to go through this for a certain reason. So sometimes we're going to go through seasons, but God has a purpose for your season. He has a reason why he's allowing you to go through things. And I believe that when we, as we can, try to handle a situation with grace and bring our frustrations to him, because sometimes it's only God that can help us with these emotions. I believe that he can produce character in you. He can help you be more compassionate, more empathetic towards others. There's a reason why God allows us to go through these things. And when you bring your emotions to him, he can help you.
So true. I think a lot of times too, talking about, going to God with these emotions, with these frustrations, so many times we go to ourself or to someone else that doesn't understand and
Yes.
can't help pull us through. Maybe talk to the person that is going through that and some things that you did to take it to God. Because also, I mean, did you ever feel guilty telling the Lord how you felt towards him?
I did feel guilty because I know that God is a good God. I know that He wants everything good for us. But I felt like to tell God, the creator of everything, that you're disappointed in Him, that you're let down in Him, and that you're even a little bit embarrassed. Because I was like, I put my testimony out. What are people going to think? Like it didn't play out the way I thought it should play out. I believe that it's okay to tell God that you're frustrated or you're disappointed or you don't understand because God can handle any emotions that you bring to him. And he wants you. He wants you to be in communication with him. God wants you to bring those emotions to him. He can help you. Sometimes our husband, our moms, our friends don't know what to say, but God knows everything about us. He knows everything about emotions. So when you bring it to him, you're also talking about it, and it's helpful and it's healing to talk about what you're going through. A lot of times we want to recluse and not say anything and think that we can handle it and think, well, nobody wants to hear this. Nobody wants to hear my story. I'm too embarrassed to say it. But when you talk to God about it, it will give you peace. I can guarantee you that peace may not come right then and there, but I've only been walking through this for a few short months. And one thing that I've learned is that God will be there. God will carry you. God will give you peace. He will heal you. It does take time. And it's the hardest thing in the world that you ever have to go through when you're going through situations like this. But you can make it, you can get through it. And I believe I am a living testimony of that. I actually want to say, because I know that there's others that have felt this way, there had been times throughout this journey where I truly felt like I was drowning. I didn't think I would be able to make it another day. The grief was so heavy. The pain was more than I can even say. And I would be like, God, how am I going to make it another day? Sometimes I would sit in my car and just cry and cry and cry, especially during the holiday time, seeing babies everywhere and people shopping for their babies. And I had thought that that's what I would be doing at that time. And so I would just be like, I don't know how I'm going to make it through. But I did. I kept bringing it to God. I kept praying about it. And another thing was there was actually girls around me that were pregnant around the same time. And one thing that I had made sure of when all of this happened, I said, this would be a good situation for someone to get bitter or to feel, to have different feelings towards others. And I was like, it will not happen. I won't let myself get to that point. I made up my mind in the beginning. I know this will be hard. I know it will be hard to see other babies, but being bitter towards a situation will not help me. And so, and I was truly, truly, truly happy to see others pregnant, others being able to bring their babies to term. And I understood what a miracle it is to bring a baby to term. And so it's easy to get bitter, but if you make up in your mind, okay, I don't want to get bitter, I'm going to be happy, genuinely happy for them, it is possible.
What are some things that you did to make sure that you didn't get in that bitter place? Because I know sometimes you don't want to be bitter. You don't want to have those feelings. You don't want for them to surface, but we are still human.
We're human, absolutely. And those feelings do come up. And so the first thing that I did was pray and just ask God, God, I love them. God, thank you for allowing them to get pregnant. God, thank you for allowing them to be able to get their baby from conception to full term. But another thing that I would do is I didn't avoid them. Our first thing that we want to do, or at least for me, when I'm in a situation like that, I try to avoid people. I don't want to look, I don't want to see. And I feel like that's okay because it's hurtful to you when you've been through something like that. It can be hurtful to see others with their babies. And I will say, even my first service back at church, I was in the sanctuary for maybe 2 minutes and I had to run out just because there's babies everywhere. But I would say, try not to avoid people. I feel like when you go around, it makes it a little bit easier to not get bitter. Hey, how are you doing? Hey, how is your pregnancy going? Is there anything I can help you with? Hey, I'm praying for you in your pregnancy. And I really feel like those are the things that help me to not get bitter. I've even bought things for their babies and things that maybe I would have bought for mine, just to make sure I didn't get bitter, I didn't get upset. And even with social media, maybe you may not have anyone in your church or around you at your job that's pregnant, but we see pregnancy announcements and we see babies being born on social media every single day. And so it is easy to get jealous even, or why are they getting to have a baby and I didn't get to have mine? Why did my story end like this? It's so easy to compare. But either, you can put accounts on mute. It's okay if you need to protect your mental health. You can put accounts on mute, or you can take a break from social media, or you can, go all in, maybe congratulate them, pray for them. I have found that prayer is really just the answer to anything.
It truly is. And I believe it was Brother Marks that said recently at our church that it's not just like that little bit of like, oh God, help me today. It's like really, whenever we're saying prayer helps, it's not going to be just a prayer like, God, I need your help today. It's going to be an all out, God, you've got to come down right now prayer.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And that will bring so much healing. But I love that you said not avoiding the situation, because that's just so human nature. I feel like anyone that's
Yes.
listening to this could attest to that. Another thing, I think maybe you have not, or you're not going through wanting a baby or not being able to have a child, but anything in life that we want, marriage, it's
Yes.
easy whenever your friends are getting engaged or your friends are married, your friends are having children, your friends are going on a part of life that you want to be going a part of, and yours isn't here yet. And you're like, God,
Yes.
why? What's wrong with me? Why am I not? And it could be anything, job situation. You may need a new home, a new vehicle. Like there's so many things that we want or that we feel like that we need that we're praying for, and we don't
Mm,
have it yet. But you talking about congratulating, not ignoring, not, shutting that out, but telling them, God, thank you for the blessings that you've given them.
yes. Absolutely. Yes. Sometimes we may not ever understand why God is doing the things that he's doing. So I know a lot, especially in the apostolic world, marriage is a big thing. And I got married a little bit later on in life. I was 27 when I got married. And growing up, I thought I was going to get married at 20, 21. And that happens for some, and that's great. But I did not understand. I was like, God, I prayed to be married at this. Like, why am I not getting married? And I have friends as well that are older and they're like, God, why am I not getting married? But God has a reason. God has a purpose. And we may not ever, I still I don't know why I got married at 27, but I mean, it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. But we don't have all the answers. God knows, and he's going to do what's absolutely best for us. He has our best interests at heart.
And like you were saying, just giving him the glory. You touched on this a little bit, but going back to going on social media, you live a pretty open life on there. You're sharing all the things, but going on there about such a private matter, you had already given your testimony, you had already been open with that, and then coming back and you didn't leave it there. You didn't like shut it down and say, well, just forget this, like I'm not sharing anymore. But instead, you continued to allow your pain to have a purpose.
Yes.
And I know that that wasn't easy, but I think that it's so important that we realize that we're not going through this for no reason. And whenever you give God glory and you continue to testify of his goodness and his faithfulness through the times that you don't feel like he's being good, but you continue to testify of that, that is a huge testament to your faith in God and to the fact that you truly still believe in him.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like too with loss, and there's a lot of women that have miscarriage. A lot of people associate those feelings with shame and with embarrassment. And actually, whenever I did open up on social media about losing our baby, there was a lot of women that said, hey, I have also went through a miscarriage or a loss, or I lost my baby was stillborn at 8 months, or whatever the case was. And they've never shared about it because they felt so much shame. But they were saying, you talking about this makes me feel so much less alone. I don't feel lonely. You talking about your daughter is actually bringing me healing. And in those moments, I was just like, okay, thank you, God. I'm glad that this story is able to help someone else. And women that are going through loss or infertility or any type of struggle, you don't have to be ashamed. You don't have to feel lonely. You're not alone. There is tons of women that go through these things, and God can help you as well. But I want people to know that you're not alone. It's not shameful. It's not your fault.
And, I feel like we put shame on a ton of situations. Like there's so many situations that I think we build up in our head around shame, and God ends up getting no glory. There's no testimony coming from it. It's not
Yeah.
helping anyone because you're
Mhm.
going through it alone because we feel shameful for something. How in the world would you feel shameful? If you stop and think about it, why would you be ashamed of certain things that you're going through that you have no control of? You're living for God. You're being faithful to Him. You're doing the same thing that someone else. And even sometimes, let's be honest, we know that we're living even more right than some people. And, you're like,
Yes.
and I've heard people say, there's a meth addict over here and they're just having babies. They don't even want their babies. They're giving their babies away. I'm longing, praying, fasting, begging God for a baby, and I can't have a baby. And it's
Yeah.
easy for us to compare our situations to someone else's, but stopping and saying, God, you're still good. He's still faithful. He's still going to help. He's still healing my heart and bringing that glory to Him. And that's something that you've done.
Yes. Well, it hasn't always been easy, but one thing that I know is that God is good, and I know that He cares for me and He loves me and He has my best interests at heart. And so having that foundation has helped. But as I said before, I did have those human emotions. And you mentioned, people on drugs that are having babies. And I had those same exact thoughts, actually. I'm like, how are these people that don't even want babies, having their babies? But God has a plan. God knows what He's doing. And in the book of Job, Job lost everything, and God ended up blessing him back with two times the things that he had. And so God gives us these stories in the Bible to look at. And I just believe that, our blessing one day is going to come. God has already blessed us through this, but I believe that we will have children one day. We will be able to bring a baby to term one day in His perfect timing. And if someone is waiting for marriage, God can bring your spouse in His timing. You just have to pray, just wait. But He does care for you. He wants those things for us. He loves us.
Today's been so helpful. I know that it has brought healing to others that are in either a season of loss or a season of waiting. Those are all the things that we don't want, right? But proving that God's still faithful, we still trust Him. And whenever you can trust Him in those hard times and in those hard seasons, that's whenever it's true faith. Like you said, I always thought I had faith. And how could you question God? And then you go through something and you're like, oh, I
Mm.
wish I didn't have to know. I've told my mom before, I'm like, I just do not understand how. And she's always said, thank God for the things you cannot understand. Because when you can understand them, then you've walked that road. You've went through that. And that's whenever you can understand it. But if somebody's going through something or they're reacting in a way or they're doing things and you're like, I just don't understand, instead of coming at them with that, stop and say, God, thank you that I do not understand, because that means I don't know that trial. I haven't had that trial. I haven't had
Yeah.
to walk that. But whenever you have had to walk it, realizing I'm not alone and God is still an ever present help in these times. I know that you've blessed and helped people by sharing your testimony and being so open, not just on social media, but coming on the podcast and being open with us. And what is one last thing that you would want to leave with the Unashamedly You community today?
I would want to say that prayer works. Prayer truly works. Anything that you're thinking about, anything that you want in life, any emotions that you have, you can bring it to God. He does answer prayer in His perfect timing. There's nothing too small. There's nothing too big that you can't bring to him. Just bring it to him. Just pray to him and watch what he will do.
He's faithful.
He
There
is.
is one thing about God, He's faithful. You may be walking through a season where you don't understand, that
Hmm.
you don't like being in, that is hurting, that you are hurting in, but He won't leave you. He said He'll never leave or forsake you. He's right there with you. He's holding your hand. He's walking with you through it. And today, this has been proof that having peace is
Hmm.
worth everything.
Yes, absolutely.
Having that peace, and that comes from prayer in a relationship with Him. Well,
Yes.
thank you so much, Asia, for being on today. You have truly blessed us by sharing your story. Continue to share it. Continue to allow people to know that God is faithful. And we know in the Unashamedly You community as a whole, I believe is going to back me with this. And we are believing that God is going to bring your miracle baby. And we're going to bring you back on here whenever you're talking about the woes of motherhood, I'm sure.
Oh,
But for
yes.
now, thank you so much for being on here and sharing this with us today. You've truly been a blessing.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
We are so grateful that you chose to listen to another episode on the Unashamedly You podcast. I would be delighted if you would go and leave us a review over on Apple or Spotify and let us know how this podcast has helped or encouraged you. Your reviews and comments honestly mean the world. I pray that you find the encouragement you need week after week with each episode. Go be unashamedly you.